Thanks, John. As John mentioned, I head up the Foundation Alumni and Events team at the university, and it's my pleasure to welcome everyone to our Alumni Online Talks. We always say in our team that the best part of our job is that we get to meet a wide range of graduates from the university who have taken their learning and qualifications from university and gone on to have a range of exciting careers in a variety of sectors, and today's distinguished speaker really epitomises that. GCU graduate Bob Stewart is the medical lead for England's senior men's rugby team and had been since 2023. In this role, Bob oversees the medical care and rehabilitation of the players, ensuring that they're in peak physical condition, both for training and also for matches. He coordinates with a dedicated team of physiotherapists, doctors and other medical professionals to provide comprehensive healthcare. Bob's illustrious career includes serving as team physiotherapist for the British and Irish Lions on 5 tours, in New Zealand in 2005, South Africa 2009, Australia 2013, and New Zealand 2017, and South Africa 2021. So travelling a long way from back in Glasgow Caledonian days. He's also contributed his expertise at major tournaments such as the Six Nations Championship and the Rugby World Cup, showcasing his extensive experience in leadership in sports medicine. So in today's talk, Bob is going to share his extensive experience in sports medicine, insights on player health and rehabilitation strategies. Bob, we're extremely grateful for all the support that you've given our team and to our students, and thrilled to have you back this afternoon. So it's my absolute pleasure to hand over to you to deliver your talk, and then we'll come back and do a little Q&A afterwards. Thank you.
Gillian and John, thanks for the very kind introduction. I don't get too many of them very often, speaking to head coaches and the likes. So it's good to be back. It's been a long time coming. Managed to help out a little bit on some of the mentorship bits for a couple of physio students in the past. So yeah, just delighted to have the opportunity to come back and see if I can shed a little bit of light on what my job's like, how I got here, and basically how I've kind of evolved over the years now to help me function at the level that I've been lucky enough to get to. I've had a lot of help along the way by a lot of various people. So like I said, it's nice just to give something a little bit back to staff, students, and anyone else that's listening. So if guys are happy, I'll share my screen now, and then I'll run through a short presentation, and then we can see what comes off the back of that. Like Gillian said, that's a bit of horrible self-promotion at the start. Probably one of the highlights of my career has definitely been the time I've been lucky enough to spend with the Lions. I'd have been very grateful if I'd done one. That would have been more than enough. But I've been very lucky to do a couple more than that. So wouldn't have said it was my ultimate aspiration when I decided I wanted to get into sport, physiotherapy really, or sports medicine. But I think you kind of make your own luck a little bit at times, and I think I managed to do that. So I'll crack on now and just move through slides. There we go. So just thought I'd quickly run through a career timeline, coaching philosophy, which I'll touch on, which again is something I've evolved over a period of time. And then the next kind of 3 or 4 areas really are about what I think's worked for me in this environment. Dealing with elite level rugby players and trying to keep them as fit and healthy for as long as we can, so that they can ultimately do what they want to do for a living. And then just a couple of sort of hopefully pearls of wisdom in the last bit at the end, what's probably helped me build my career, and might help some of the listeners do the same. So I'll shift on. So effectively, when I applied to Glasgow Caledonian in 1990, it was still Queen's College. So that's me showing my age. So I was part of the first cohort that joined Glasgow Caledonian really in that autumn. We'd applied for a 3-year course and turned up on day one and it was a 4-year honours, which shocked a few of us. It certainly shocked a few of the mature students who were slightly more vociferous about that than the young ones were. But they were a great, 4 years for me. I didn't really know what I was going to do. Went to a lot of open days. Along the way, nothing floated my boat in terms of engineering or business or anything else, and stumbled across physio almost by accident. And the anatomy wall charts were kind of what really sold it to me. I just thought that's something that looked very interesting. I wasn't really much of a scientist at school. I was definitely more arts based, but that was what originally piqued my interest. There's a couple of other bits on display. So I applied for that, and I think back then being a male and having the right grades was probably a bonus, and that I think there was only maybe seven of us in the first cohort of gentlemen, shall we speak. So, but yeah, look, it was. I can't speak highly enough of the placements. Some of the lectures I had with a guy, Dave McLean, who basically was, I think I had him for the first 2-3 years, but he'd been the Scotland rugby team physio, and had then become their S&C coach, I think, at the time, by the time I started university. So I must admit, by the time I got to my honours project in 4th year with him as a supervisor, I had started to kind of think about looking at sport as a potential career choice, but I wouldn't underestimate the amount of satisfaction I got out of the placements that I did in the NHS, and the experience that gave me. I think heading into sport was invaluable. So I qualified in '95, and then I grew up about 4 miles from Crosshouse Hospital, and was lucky enough to get a job there at the start, and that was basic grade rotations, really. So I went through, as you'd expect, outpatients, orthopaedics, surgical, geriatrics, stroke rehab, you name it. It was the usual sort of 4-month rotations, and again that set me up really well. And to move on in 1997. I was playing rugby for a club in Glasgow, and was lucky enough to get an opportunity to go and play rugby in New Zealand on the back of that, through a coach that we had. Still probably had some delusions of grandeur at that point, that I might make it as a professional rugby player. So went out there to try and push that, and then was lucky enough to get a job in a sports medicine clinic out there. So they'd the New Zealand Rugby League doctor, sports medicine doc, worked in the same sort of practice at the time, and had opportunities to treat Super 15 rugby players and a couple of All Blacks. So for a Scottish kid on the other side of the world, having qualified for 2 years, it was that was my first real introduction to sports physio and sports medicine, which again just kind of made me all the more determined when I got back later that year that I would have a look, or start having a look. And I suppose not much longer after that, I got back late '97. There was actually a rehab job got advertised with the Scottish Rugby Union, and I didn't really think I had enough experience then for what they were looking for in that role. So I didn't apply for that. But then on the back of that, I sort of started trying to dig around. I lived in Glasgow still, so I contacted Rangers and Celtic off the bat, and the doc at Glasgow Rugby, really just looking to see if I could volunteer for anything, whether there was other stuff I could do, get in, just help out, go and observe. Whether that again was physio related or doctor related, I didn't really care. I was just trying to get a foot in the door, really. And then on the back of those conversations with the Glasgow team doctor, I got a phone call basically asking me to apply for a job with them because their physio was leaving to go back to football. So just by sort of trying to knock at a few doors, I was lucky enough to get an opportunity to apply for a job, which I was then offered. And I started with Glasgow Warriors. Well, it was Glasgow Caledonians back then. And that was November 1998. So that was my initial job in professional sport, which if you look at how we operate now, I was looking after, I think, 55 players on my own, working out of a changing room with a bag of tape in the boot of my car, an ultrasound unit, which I didn't really know how to work, and a wobble board. And that was it, really. So from where it started to where we've kind of got to now, I'd say there's been quite a sea change in how professional rugby players are looked after. But I think, that you look back at that and how you managed that amount of players with that equipment, and you still managed to keep people relatively fit and healthy. There's still things that I did back then that I use now, or systems or principles that are still fairly similar. So a very good learning experience as a first up job in pro sport. So again, that basically led on to I was at Glasgow from 1998 through to 2006, and then sort of tied in with that. I was lucky enough to start working with Scotland. I went on a tour in 1999 to South Africa. That was my first involvement. And then I basically, from then on in, I missed the World Cup because I was just covering for someone in 99. Then the coaches changed after that World Cup, and I was brought in for the summer tour in 2000, and then worked with Scotland sort of through every major tournament from then. So that was every Six Nations, summer tours, and then the Autumn Nations series that runs now, and that included the World Cup to Australia in 2003. So that was my collective sort of piece with Scottish rugby up until that point. And just what was a bit sad at the time, really, and the reason I looked to move on was that I just kind of felt that the way the system was at that time, my job and my role was never really going to change. I wasn't really getting challenged too much by coaches, by other staff that I worked with, and I just felt I was a bit stuck in a rut. So I thought something had to give, or I had to try and take myself out of my comfort zone a little bit. So I applied to a job advert from a recruitment company for a director of sports medicine and for a Premiership rugby team in England, which happened to be Worcester. So I moved down to Worcester in 2006. I didn't really know what director of sports medicine meant because I'd never headed up a department before, I'd never managed people. And I think as sort of what commonly happens in sport is that you get quite good at doing one job, and then people automatically think that you're going to be really good at doing another job that you've had no training or no experience in doing. So I had no management training, all of a sudden had to look after a team of like 5 or 6 physios, 3 or 4 doctors, soft tissue therapists, which was, eye-opening to say the least. Sadly, the season at Worcester, the two guys that had, for me, showed a lot of faith in me by appointing me, the head coach and the director of rugby, they both got sacked that year because we didn't really, I think we won in the last day of the season to stay up in the Premiership. So they both got sacked, which I think didn't really sit too well with a lot of the staff that were left. And then I was quite fortunate. I had no intention of leaving. I had a 3-year contract, but then just the whole sort of piece around that made me kind of have a quick look around. And I was lucky enough that the same job came up at Gloucester down the road. So I moved down to Gloucester as head of medical, which I was there for 9 years. Had a bit more success down there, but there's a merry-go-round of coaches, which kind of involved almost every 2 years. We'd have one really good season, then the next season we were pretty pants, and then a coach would get sacked, and then that cycle just seemed to run through the 8 years that it was there. But I did wonder at one point if I was the common denominator for that, but for having survived longer than anyone. But that was a great experience. Gloucester's a proper rugby town. The whole sort of town get behind the team, good or bad, and great experience working with some exceptional players. I reckon some of the best players in the world, to be fair, we had when I first started down there, and that was, as I said, like just kind of kept me going. And then I was very fortunate after the 2015 World Cup. Stuart Lancaster got sacked, obviously, by the RFU, and Eddie Jones came in, and I got approached by England in 2016. 2016 to join them. Now, for me at that point, that was purely just going back to being a physiotherapist. And to be honest, having been a manager for about the best part of 10 years, that kind of really appealed to me back then. I felt like I'd not lost my way clinically a little bit, but there's so much admin pressure and time pressures as the game evolved. From an administrative point of view, that it took time out of me doing what I really loved doing and what I felt I was really good at. So joining England as a Scotsman was a bit tricky at the start, but I got plenty of abuse from players and staff alike, and friends, or so-called friends. But again, it was an opportunity. I felt at the time that it was only going to make me better as a clinician, and then hopefully at some point potentially as a manager, and if the opportunity came up again. And I think during this time I've probably worked with 2 or 3, I'd say, exceptional practitioners in terms of coaches and strength and conditioning coaches and medics that have probably really shaped and pushed me to get to where I am now, or where I feel I've got to. So I can't thank them enough for that. And then obviously Eddie left his post in 22 and was replaced by Steve. And Eddie's model was very much, I would have said, doctor-led medical system, where the doctor was the head of the department with a full-time doc, and they ran the ship, which allowed the physios to kind of go on and do what we were good at. But Steve's bias coming in was that he wanted a physio in charge of the medical department, just because he feels that they've got a better feel for like training load, training volume, how you can manage that and manage individuals more effectively through that, which is sometimes what, some of the doctors aren't quite maybe exposed to as much in their training. And I think if I reflect back on my time at Glasgow, when you're working on your own, and sort of trying to run 50 people with one medic and one strength conditioner, it's jobs like that and experiences like that help you when you get into roles like this as well. So, I think I've been really fortunate that all my experiences, good and bad, through that, I think have really helped me, one, get to where I am now, but also navigate a lot of the environment and the problems, or the so-called issues that occasionally pop up at this end now. So that's a kind of snapshot of my career timeline. And then just the last bit, I think Gillian already alluded to, was just, this for me has been really fortunate. It's been part of the best part, getting a chance to work with different players, different coaches in different environments. And it's something it's got bigger every year that I've done it. And as I said, if I'd been asked to do one, I'd have been delighted. I'd have said, thanks very much. I've been lucky enough to do 5. So I've not heard anything yet about the next one, so I'm not sure whether that's a good or a bad thing, but I can't grumble, so I won't. And then I've been lucky enough to do, I think I had a quick snapshot of this when I was putting this together. So I managed to get to 3 World Cups. I think I've done about 14 Six Nations, 11 summer tours and 12 autumns. So I think it's probably telling me at some point I need to move on and give someone else a shot, I think. But that's from a career standpoint where I've got to, and how I got to where I am now, really. So I'll move on to. I just thought this is probably how I've evolved, really, to get, again. I think, yes, I'm a qualified physio, but I also see myself as a coach, and I think that's generally how we are sort of looked at by our rugby coaches, by our S&C coaches. We're all part of a performance team. So I think if you get any aspirations to be involved in sport, I think that's the best way to look at yourself, because ultimately you might be trying to make people fitter and healthier or return them for injury, but ultimately you're trying to make them better individuals, better people, and make them more resilient at navigating this environment. So how you can help them make choices and changes. And I think it's also looking at what you want to get out of it yourself, which I think sometimes gets sort of washed over a little bit. I think you've got some level of self-fulfillment, or you want to be able to get something out of being in a career like this, because it does take up a lot of your free time, a lot of family time and other things like that. So I think it's really imperative that, if you've got something you want to achieve, then, you've got to get some sort of satisfaction out of it yourself. So for me, that's probably where I sat. I got asked to do this. I did a mentorship process myself with a guy called Dan Pfaff, who's a really famous track and field coach, through a company called Altus. And he made us sit and write this down on day one, and I actually found it really, really difficult trying to work out why I actually did the job and what I wanted to get from it. So I won't read through that. It's pretty self-explanatory, I think. But ultimately, you want to get to the best point you can to help the people that you look after, and to get the most out of your career that you can as an individual. And I think that part for me is, I think it's constantly been able to refine what you do. And I've tried to do that over the years, and I think I've managed to probably do that quite effectively, which is probably why I'm still in a job at the moment, which I'll take. But I think that's it, isn't it? You kind of really want to just make sure that, for me now as a manager, I obviously want to get a benefit from doing what I do, but I've also got a duty of care to my staff and trying to make them enjoy what they do and be able to deliver what they're capable of delivering. So if I can take a lot of the flack away from them that allow them to prosper and be really efficient and effective at what they do, then that's a win for me. And again, what we do for the players kind of speaks for itself, really. But ultimately, it's about performing at your best, whether that's me, whether that's my staff, or whether that's the players. The gloves are off. That's just the equivalent of does it make the boat go faster? And I think what we've allied to that is effectively a set of sort of, behaviours or standards that we hold ourselves accountable to as a group of medics. And if we can hold ourselves accountable to that, it means that we can make the players more accountable. And ultimately we all get the best or the most out of the process, whether that's like rehabilitation, whether that's, performance related work. But I think the accountability piece as a group has brought us closer together. And I think if you can do that, it means you end up with a happy team, and a happy team generally is far more efficient and effective at what you need to do in environments like this. Ultimately, this is probably just alluding to my rehab philosophy, or how I treat people, or individuals really. So at the moment, I've probably got about 4 key cornerstones to that. The first one is building a multi-layered approach. Second one is just measure what matters. Third one's build relationships. And then, trigger happy. And then the last one's just team first. So the next 4 or 5 slides, I'll just basically run through, what they look like in my eyes, and it might hopefully provoke some thought in people that are listening. So building a multi-layered approach. For me, I've played around with a lot of different things over the years, different methods, different approaches to how I think the body works. And I think fundamentally for me, it's about training movement and not muscles. I fully get the need for isolated strengthening. There's a lot of evidence base that supports that as well in certain issues, certain areas, certain topics. But for me, that's how your body's actually built to function, and that's probably, as I say, my bias now. And I'll try and sort of bolt things onto that as and when I see fit, or if I feel I need to change a direction or have a look. But that will fundamentally be the sort of principle that I follow. Landmark based and not timeline based, and I think anybody gets injured in pro sport, the question from any coach or anyone else, including the player, is like, how long are we going to be out for? And I think things like scans and imaging and consultant opinions will generally hinge on that number. And I think it's not always as black and white as that. So I think and how most people probably work in professional sport now is they look at, landmark-based criteria that if you tick them off, then you can move on to the next stage and so forth. So I think being landmark-based and not timeline-based is kind of an acceptable way to practice and something that's worked well for us. Reverse engineering, and I think this could apply to Joe Bloggs, who's a bricklayer or an Ironman, or someone that's just a recreational athlete as well as as much as a professional rugby player. I always have a sort of an end stage in mind, like what game do you think they're going to be back from, and then I find that makes it a lot easier for me to work backwards from there rather than trying to start at day one and plan it out forwards. I think it's far easier to plot where you need to be by when, and ultimately how you can see, obviously for our guys, depending on how long they're out for, you obviously need to be back in team training by a certain point if they're going to play by a certain date. So I think it just helps factor in when they need to be back on the field running, when they might be back in the gym lifting fully, when you want to test certain things at certain times that give you the sort of the green light, so to speak, to push on to the next stage. So again, the reverse engineering has worked well for us. Opportunity in pro sport, there's so many competing factors. Everybody wants a piece of players, whether that's coaches, S&C, other things, sports psychologists, nutritionists, and that's just when they're with us, the clubs. Sometimes they don't get much room to breathe. So if they do pick up an injury that's going to keep them for 6 to 8 weeks, for me, that's a real opportunity where you might be able to get some form of like athletic development into them, or a window where you can make a few changes in a few other areas that you might not routinely get the chance to do. So I think the key thing is players are always going to be down and disappointed when they're injured and they're not playing, because that's what they love doing. But I think it helps maybe at times put a positive spin on being injured when you can make a dent in a few other areas. And the last thing for me is plan Bs. So plan A is obviously full training, full match play and everything. And I think the key thing is a plan B. If they can't do plan A, you have to have a really robust plan B. So each day you give them something that's not full training. It has to be as close to what they're going to do on the field or would be doing on the field from a metabolic, physiological perspective, so that they're not missing out. And it gives the individual, the player, the best chance of getting back and reintegrating into full team training relatively smoothly. And that's been a real massive part of what we've done, is getting those two things as close together as possible. And if you can't do plan B, then you need to have a plan C. So you just got to keep working back until you can find something that they can achieve. Key thing is where they're coming from. I think also helps you know how hard you can push these guys. So that's things like what's their previous injury history, what's their chronic load like, how do they move, what their biomechanics are like, their kinetics, their kinematics, all these things we look at from a movement capability perspective. What's the strength like? What's the power like? How quickly can we get those back to where they are? And that helps us know, where they are coming into that injury, or that block of time off, whether they've got a real good platform they can push on from. If they've missed a lot of games and missed a lot of training, it might be you don't get them back quite when you think they're going to get back. So having an understanding of that, again, lets you know probably how hard you can push these guys or the individuals that you're working with. I think the second thing is knowing exactly where they need to get to. So for us, if you speak to any of our players, if they come in and train with us and play international rugby, what they do at their clubs just doesn't compare to that. So for us, we need to have a good understanding of the demands of our training and our game model and what that looks like, so that when we are rehabilitating people, we know we're getting the right dose of, gym, the right dose of on-field running, reconditioning into them, that's again going to allow them to get back and stay back. And I think that's the key thing, and where we've been, I think, following this process, we've been very effective, is that we've got guys back in our environment and then they've never had a recurrence or a relapse. So I think that's been proof to us that the system we've kind of runs worked well for us in terms of how we operate. And again, like for us, all of our players have an individual development plan, which is basically most of it's all rugby based. But again, I need to have an understanding of the positional requirements of almost every player in every position and what that might look like, so that I can feed into areas that they need to improve on or have an opportunity to improve on through their rehab process. So that plan doesn't just get shelved because they're injured, which might mean regressing exercises or activities back to the bare minimum, but at least it's going to still influence that individual plan. And again, I just alluded that earlier, the deep understanding of athletes' training and event demands. Again, that doesn't matter. I think that's consistent with any sport, recreational, professional, across all boards. You've got to have an understanding of where that person or patient in front of you wants to get back to and what that looks like. And again, I've gone plan B again, and that just underpins everything. Like I said, if you can get that right, it will make your patient, your client, your player, your athlete get back to where they want to be as quicker. And I had tons of help with from the strength and conditioning coaches that I've worked with who have done an amazing job around that stuff. And, we've picked up some great things along the way. And again, individual athlete positions are obviously very different in rugby, and the demands of each position is very different. So we've had a lot of trial and error, shall we say, around plan Bs. But again, we've been pretty good at getting a plan together that's helped the guys get back and stay back. Measuring what matters, I think for me, there's a lot of complexity. You could test anything out there to the nth degree. And I think the question I would say to you to ask yourself is like, what are you testing? Why are you testing it? And what's it actually telling you, or what's it going to tell you? So is it going to be of any use at all? Or is it going to really help you push on? So for me, the first thing is keep it really simple. There's a lot of noise out there, I think. And I think what we've done is just looked at set types of injuries and looked at 3 or 4 tests that we think at the appropriate time will give us the information that we want, just more to corroborate that we're going in the right direction and the player's tracking the right way. So that'd be step 1. Step 2, I think what you're really interested in is how does your athlete or your patient or your client, how do they produce force and how do they accept force, and what capability have they got to do that? And again, how you choose to measure that. We've used certain tests for certain positions with certain injuries, for instance. So, and sometimes we're just playing around. There might not be a ton of evidence, but if we can get something that we can track or get a decent measure on that's positionally specific to that individual, then you can. There's no reason why you can't, use your imagination, so to speak, in this sphere. Play around with stuff, have a look, and then just see if you can get numbers that you can reproduce, standardize the start positions, etc., and then go from there. GPS has been a big one for us, and that obviously again just alludes to more the club and country differences. So for us, we know what the running demands are. Like rugby is still obviously a high collision sport, but it's predominantly a running based sport. So for us, having a really good understanding of the position specific demands, running demands for each player and each individual sort of position allows you to then design a rehab program, a reconditioning program that's going to be really appropriate. And then the last one, I think, is just having something in a rehab block that allows you to measure or monitor trends longitudinally. And that may be something as simple as jump height on a CMJ or a 10.5. You might use different. That's generally the CMJ is a classic one. It might be that you track wellness markers through the rehab process, but it just allows you to identify where guys are maybe dropping off, whether you've given them too much, not enough, things like that. So again, I think having something that you can track over time, and again, whether they're injured or not, can be really useful to how you manage players in the long term as well, through a season or a microcycle. Just relationships. I think how you build these is key. I think for me, what relationships are key to me in my role. Definitely the relationships with your athletes, my relationships with my staff and the other staff I work with. For us, having relationships with club staff, because ultimately all of our players are owned by clubs effectively, even though we contribute. And I think your relationship with external practitioners, so that's looking at obviously specialists, radiologists. What else would I say? Externals. You can have parents, you can have agents, wives, girlfriends, you name it. There's probably rugby's probably getting to a point at the top end a little bit where it's starting to get a little bit like football in terms of the amount of some of the players have got teams around them now. PR, all these sort of things, which is a bit more prevalent football-wise down this neck of the woods certainly. But we've got a couple of players going that way as well, so that adds a kind of different dynamic. If players are injured, there's other people not making money off the back of them at times, and that changes dynamics quite greatly. So they're the relationships that are important to me in my environment. Why are they important? I think if I can build those relationships, it makes it easier to create connections with players. And for me, that means that I can hold them accountable, but they can also hold me accountable. I think that's a two-way thing. I want feedback from players. I want to know what works for them, what doesn't work. And I think I need to be accountable for what I'm delivering to them. And they're ultimately the only people that can hold you accountable, I think. And that's something that maybe doesn't happen too much, but I definitely go after that from the guys that I work with. It helps me get compliance with what I think they need to do ultimately to get themselves back fit. And it also allows me to have an impact on them, and hopefully that's a positive one and not a negative one. But I think it's an opportunity to try we've got quite a young squad at the minute. So in terms of shaping good performance behaviours, I want to have that sort of impact to them and give them every opportunity to be successful at this level. How do I go about it? I think for me, reflections and debriefs are a massive part of what we do. If I rehab someone and I don't get quite what I want from it, I'm not, back in the dark old days, I would probably blame the player. He's just not listening, he's an idiot. I think in reality now, I'm definitely a lot older than I was when I first started. So most of the boys that I work with are probably about the same age as my kids now. So that gives me a bit of insight into how I can try and connect with them, just purely because I've got children the same age. But I think I need to reflect on what I could have done better. So if I haven't connected with someone, I haven't been able to get a player to do what I wanted them to, then I need to look at what I can do different or do better the next time to make sure that I get I get what I want from it, but ultimately the player gets what he needs. So I think having the ability to reflect on that and debrief with other members of staff. I've got other members of staff that will watch me treat, watch me rehab, and if I'm missing something, then I want to know that I want to get their opinions as well. So I think it's key to have people around you that are happy to debrief and check and challenge you as well. And ultimately, if I get most of that right, it'll let me motivate the people that I work with. It gives me an ability to negotiate if they don't want to do too many things that I want them to do. And ultimately, it helps me persuade them get to where they need to be. So I think if I get that right, it gives you a really good, solid platform to push on and be successful. And lastly, the sort of team first bit for me, I think it's easy for me to go, I've been working in pro rugby now for nearly 25 years. I know everything. And sometimes I still feel I know nothing. And I don't think you want to lose sight of that. I've got a lot of good people that work around with me, when we're in camp, who I can bounce ideas off, use their expertise and experience, as well as using external experts. And that's something you don't want to lose sight of. It's a bit of a cliche that every day is a learning day, but I think in these environments, that's the way you have to look at it. And that was one thing that, Eddie Jones certainly drilled into us as a staff as a whole, was really you had to get better every day. You expect that of the players. So I don't think that's unreasonable to expect that of your staff either. Second one kind of ties in really, I think just being really consistent with how you collaborate well, ultimately, there's a lot of egos in sport, and certainly the club country thing in England's probably a bit of a constant battle, shall we say, at times, where it doesn't matter what side of the fence you sit on. England want one thing, the club wants something else, and trying to take the threat out of that and actually put the player at the centre of it, for me, has been key. And I think that getting that collaboration right is only going to benefit the players, which ultimately benefits the team, whether they're at their club or whether they're with us. And if that makes you win games, again, club will be successful in the back of it, and hopefully we are too. Then I don't think you can underestimate the power of that. And again, this just all jumps in. Like I try, and if we're making decisions on return to play, or whether that's short term, long term, people are with us, or where we go, how we manage things, having my staff all involved in the process and being involved in discussions means that they feel that they're embedded in every decision that's been made. And I think again that builds a strength of bond between us as a medical team. So the amount of input I can get from others, ultimately the decision probably rests with me if it's my player that I'm looking after, and then I'll obviously try and support anyone else who's in the same position making a decision on one of their players. But again, that's a strong part of what we do. And I think check and challenge is another key one. So I don't mind getting called out about what I'm doing by other members of staff. And I think the one thing is, if you ask for it, don't get upset when you get it, and I think that's only, again, you got to park your ego at the door. It's for the benefit of the player, it's for the benefit of the team, not the benefit of your ego. And I think checking and challenging is something that we do routinely. It doesn't matter who you are or what you are or what role you're in. Everybody's got the power to sort of, pipe up if they see something that, they're not sure of, or why are you doing that? What could you do better? And I think the more you can do that, the more robust you'll get as a team, and you'll perform better under pressure, which we are, every day. We've got to have as many people training every day as we can if we're going to perform at the weekend. So we just can't say, not too bored today, I'll just let him have a day off. It just won't cut it at this level. So I think you've got to work out how you get yourselves into a position where you're going to constantly develop as a team, constantly challenge each other in this environment, and ultimately get the players to where they want to be. The last bit, just if you've got anything out of that or anything left in your ears for listening, just looking at how if you're starting fresh into physio or looking to get into sport, how you might build your career. For me, your philosophy is a big thing, and it evolves over time. And I think just be aware that you've never cracked it. You just want to consistently evolve what you do. Like I've kind of got to a point now where my philosophy is, to train the movements, not muscles. And over a period of time, I'll bolt things onto that. I'll see if it works. I'll keep using some of it. I'll get rid of some other bits. But I think work out what works for you. And I'm not saying my philosophy is the right one. It's been successful for me, but I think you need to work out what you want to achieve as an individual, how you think the body functions, and how you can then get the most out of that, and just bolt little bits onto it as you go. And that's something I've tried to do fairly consistently, do you know what I mean, without deviating too much from a theme. But I think if you can do that, it will certainly set you on a decent path. The art v science debate, I think there's obviously evidence-based practice is massive in sports medicine. At the moment, it's only getting bigger with the amount of evidence and research that's been done across a host of disciplines. But I'd also say in this environment, I've learned just as much from practice-based evidence. No two individuals are the same. They might look the same on the bed, and you do one thing to one and it works, and you do one thing to another and it doesn't. And I think sometimes if you look at research on its own, you might have 200 people with Achilles tendon problems, but they've got it for 200 different reasons. So I think the key thing is don't be scared to use. If you reflect and debrief routinely, then you'll learn really well from your practice, and then obviously the evidence will help support that at times, but it might not. But I think you've got to use your eyes and really look at what you're doing, how you apply it, and what it's telling you. And that'll help you build your philosophy as much as, reading a ton of articles. So there's definitely a very practice-based part to that. Next one is just, I would just say in pro sport, the one thing you need to be able to do is teach and coach. You can have the best knowledge base in the world, and I've worked with people that are way, way brighter than I am, but they couldn't teach, they couldn't coach, and they can't get their message across. And you'll really struggle, certainly in a team environment, I think, if you don't have those skills. So, I've probably learned working with other people and working with good rugby coaches. Certainly when I came into England with Eddie, the way he structured coaching and the way their coaches actually coached rugby was just light years ahead of anything I'd seen up until that point. And that made me massively reflect on then how I coached, whether you're rehab exercises or you're in the gym doing strength, whatever you were doing, massively changed my approach. So I'd recommend that you can be as bright as you like, but if you can't actually apply it and teach it and coach it, then, and that has to be certainly with rugby players, that has to be in layman's terms. Some of them are very bright, some of them not so bright, but I think having a good grasp of who you're dealing with is massive. The team first thing, I think, is just regardless of whether it's your medical team, your wider performance team and the whole group here. And I think the one thing that Eddie taught me, again, alluding back to him, was that, when I walked in on day one, he said we're going to win the World Cup in 2019, and he was adamant we're going to win it. And I'd been in other changing rooms and team environments where they said, "Oh, we're going to win the Premiership this year," and you could tell like 50% of them didn't believe it. Like, he was categoric, we're going to win it, and this is how we're going to do it. And every member of staff bought into that, and that adds massively to your enjoyment, and I think your focus. If you've got something like that to go after. So all I would say is, if you've got a coach, you might not always agree with their methods, you might not always agree with how they do things, but ultimately is look at the bigger picture. If you want to work in a successful team or be successful with a team that evolves over a period of time, then definitely put the team first. And the last one, I'm showing my age now. I'd say probably try and avoid rabbit holes. So social media is a marvelous tool, but there is so much information out there now and so much disinformation out there now that I would advise anyone to be really selective about who you follow and what you look at. So, I mean, I sort of binned all of mine off because I just found it a massive distraction, and I couldn't focus on what I thought was maybe good or bad or indifferent, or just see something that you think fits your bias, so you go and try it without really understanding what it was doing or why you were doing it. But it looked quite fancy, or you'd seen someone else do it. And the key thing is, for me, I've probably narrowed down to maybe five groups or 5 individuals that I know and I trust implicitly on how they operate, how they think. If they put something out, it's going to challenge how I think. Whether I use it or not, but it will make me check and challenge myself. And I think you can go, we've probably all been there, where you start watching one thing on YouTube and about 10 hours later, you wonder where the time's gone. So that'd be a peril or a pitfall I would advise you to try and avoid, is try and find, and you might need to start a bit wider than 5. I've been lucky enough to be exposed to some great people over the years, and that's why I've been able to narrow mine down to about that. But you might need to start slightly wider with that, but find some good, reliable sources and then stick with them. And I'm happy to share who I kind of listen to or don't, if that's helpful. And that's it. That's a lot. Thanks for having me or listening.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Bob. That was really, really fascinating, and I think so interesting to hear about how you plan, when there's so many different factors out with your control in terms of injuries and progression and matches and all the different stakeholders that you're kind of managing along the way. And I'm sure we probably could have done a full session on your approach to social media, because I imagine there is quite a lot of disinformation out there, and when you're starting out in your career, knowing who to trust and not. So we can do that as the follow-up one. But we've been inundated with questions. The good news is I think you have covered off a lot of them through your presentation, which is perfect. There were a couple of people though asking more specifically about breaking into sort of sports physio or sports science, and I imagine it is quite competitive, so more just looking for advice on how to stand out, and if there was any additional courses once they're qualified that you would recommend that they do to make them stand out.
Yeah, I think the landscape's definitely changed from when I sort of got into sport, where it was like basically it was almost expected you would volunteer. Do you know what I mean? Like to try and get a foot in the door, and that's basically what I did on the back of it. But I think now there's a lot more competition. They've got sports therapists, sports rehabbers. Like from a physio point of view, there's a lot more people in the workplace, so to speak, looking for jobs like that. So my advice would be, try and pick up. It depends what sport you're interested in, obviously, but try and pick up any experience you can. If that's at, local sports teams, whether that's athletics, whether that's, cricket, whether it's rugby or football or whatever. If teams local to you have got physios that are working there, part-time, Tuesday, Thursday nights, then try and pick up some experience. Or, if you can get that paid, there are, certainly jobs kicking around in most sports now, I think, because of probably litigation or, legislation now from government, it's mandated. But I think trying to get any experience in any sport, like I wouldn't necessarily, if I was looking to employ like somebody not, a younger member of staff, say, for an academy type post or something like that, I wouldn't just look at somebody that worked in rugby. I'd be interested in people that have gone and looked at different environments. Just, I think really trying to get a mixed breadth of experience is key. And just put yourself out there from trying to, get those experiences, or try and, it's difficult for us. We find it difficult to take students for placements and things like that because of the nature of our work. We're not in camp a lot and things like that. But I think ultimately trying to get involved with sports teams or sports medicine doctors or anyone that might take you for a bit of experience as much as a paid job, just have a look around and do that. From a course perspective, I think probably off the top of my head, the two main ones I would look at at the moment would be anything on Sportsmith, which is run by a guy, Rob. There's a lot of good information on that. A lot of good articles, podcasts. He does webinars and courses. He's put on a few courses recently, which again are very relevant to running specifics in sport.
Who was that? Sorry, I don't know my computer. Just in case it's not my computer.
Sportsmith is the company.
Okay.
And the guy that runs that's a chap called Rob Pacey. And anything that's on Altus is probably more athletics based, but they do a really good performance therapy course. They do a lot of it's to do with, again, in running based sports, there's a lot of good information from them, and in a wider performance perspective, they look at a breadth of areas as well. So they'd be two places I would recommend to go and look at course perspective.
Perfect, thank you. Quite a few questions around sort of how you deal with the conflict of getting players back on track for themselves and getting them back on the pitch, or whether there's kind of the teams more trying to encourage you to get them back on the pitch sooner versus what's right for the player themselves.
Yeah, I think probably over the years I kind of feel like I've almost become a risk manager rather than a physio. Do you know what I mean? But I think that's where you've got to, like, the way I look at it is I have to like the player will want to play. Like, and I can only speak when they come into us as an international player, they're going to want to play at the weekend. Some of them are very economical with the truth and what they tell us, which makes it tricky. And you're going to have coaches that are always going to push, they want to have their best team on the field. And I think what you have to do is be really robust in your return to play processes. And I think if you get that right, you know that the players have ticked off every step of the way to allow themselves to function safely at the weekend. And if they get to a point where you don't, like I've had conversations where, look, it's my recommendation you don't play. I've got a player saying I want to play and a coach that wants to pick him, and I've been like, right, that's fine. But you both need to understand the risks of you playing. And if you accept those risks, that's fine. But, you know, and that's whether, you know, is he going to be able to do what he needs to do for the benefit of the team, you know, ultimately. And that for me is, the coach has got to be sensible, but all I can do is give them the information. And sometimes you kind of, I would err on trying to protect my duty of care to the player, not the team effectively. But ultimately, I've also got a duty of care to give them every opportunity to play. So what I'll tend to do is, rather than rule someone out at the start of a week, you know, if it's not clear and obvious, really, is then I have to get all my bits right. Almost to, if I make it hard enough for them to progress in a way, they probably won't, if that makes sense. And that's without being stupid about it. But I think it is just that managing risk and being really robust in the processes you follow that get them to either a point where they're going to be successful and be able to play, or they don't.
Yeah. Perfect. A couple of questions as well, like maybe kind of like around sort of confidence, like how you've dealt with situations where maybe people haven't quite believed in you, or you felt that maybe slight imposter syndrome, like how you've overcome that.
Yeah, I think I've definitely still got that, I think, to a certain extent. And I think most people, there's certainly a lot of us at this level probably have, to a certain extent. I think if you just keep trying to, like, I think if you go back and look at what you've achieved when things have gone well and things haven't gone well, and then as long as you keep learning from the mistakes that you make, do you know what I mean? We're all going to make mistakes. I still make mistakes. Do you know what I mean? And I'll still make mistakes moving forward. But what I endeavour to do is not to make the same mistake twice. And I think if you can do that in this environment, or certainly from a coach's point of view, like, and the key thing is to hold your hand up. Like this, I've been in environments before where it's, you know, it's his fault, S&C didn't get that right, or sports science didn't get this right, or the rugby coaches wrecked it. Like, ultimately, we're all culpable and we're all responsible. But if I've got it wrong, I've just put my hand up and said, I think I've got it wrong. I made a mistake, bitten off too much, you know, or I've not pushed them hard enough. You know, sometimes it'll be that. And I think if you can do that, reflect on your good and your bad experiences in the right way. And I think don't get too down on it. Do you know what I mean? Like, find people who are, you know, it's good to have people around you, whether they're in the same environment or external to the environment you work in, that will check and challenge you, do you know what I mean, in a good way. And I think you get reaffirmation from some of that. But if not, you get a kick in the bum if you need to do something a bit better. And I think that's probably how I've tried to navigate it best I can.
Yeah, no, that's a really good way of looking at it, I think. Just conscious of time, so we'll just wrap up with one final question. Looking back now, if you were to be a student again, what advice would you give to yourself? Just as you were kind of like graduating, if you were to look back.
I think I must admit, like, there's probably a desire now, and I know people that have done it, where they've left university and gone straight into sport. I'm definitely glad I worked in the NHS when I did, because I think it gave me real breadth and knowledge, even from a medical side of things, that stood me in good stead coming into sport a couple of years later. And if I look back on it, if I hadn't taken the career path I have, I would have gone down the route of stroke rehab, because that, for me, what some of those guys do is still amazes me looking back at it. And I think I probably at the start was a bit, and probably still am, I think if you've got an ambition and you want to get into sport, then go after it. I probably fluffed around a little bit. Thought I might have made it playing rugby myself, was never going to be quick enough or probably good enough, really. But it wasn't until that door sort of shut that I kind of then started thinking about something else. And I think for me, that's the bottom line, is that I think, it's not being cocky or arrogant about it. I think if you've got someone you want to go after, that you've got a real interest in, then go and grab it and do everything you can to give yourself the best opportunity. I've been really lucky to do something that I really love doing and still love doing. So it doesn't really feel like a job, like it is like a vocation, really. And I think that for me is the key. And I probably didn't get that when I was a student. When I graduated, I didn't know what I was going to do before I went to uni. Happened to stumble across something that I liked. But I think there's no harm in having a real clear path, like when you're in your first year at uni, where you want to go and where you're going up. And don't be ashamed to go and try and grab it. That'd probably be what I would have changed about myself.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Bob. Honestly, it's been a fascinating talk, really interesting to hear about your career since GCU. I know that there's advice in there that will really resonate with the students that are doing physiotherapy, sports science, but also I think for students across and graduates, across the university, definitely some key advice on sort of handling challenges and feedback and that type of thing that we can all learn from. And I'm sure there's definitely a few more tours coming your way that we'll be hearing about in the future. So thank you so much for your time, for all you do for our students and graduates, and we hope to see you very soon. Thank you. That's great.